do that. Okay, so many different things. Okay, we are on our 5th week of David, and remember that we are studying David because we want to understand why David was a man after God's own heart. And today we're going to be looking at chapters 23 through 25, and we're going to find some more examples of why David is a man after God's own heart. I am going to attempt for the 3rd time to share my screen and share. Okay. Can you guys give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen now? Yes, good. Yes, I can. Okay, so this is David's sojourn in the wilderness when he's running away. So a lot of these things we've talked about in the last couple of weeks, and we'll continue to talk about them today. But I wanted to give you some geographic references. Ramah is where Samuel, and he will come up today, the judge and prophet live. Saul is from Gibeah, sorry. Nob, we ended up in Nob last week. Nob was where all the priests live. And remember, Saul, through his people, just slaughtered 85 priests in Nob. There's Jerusalem. David was born in Bethlehem. Goliath was from Gath. Today we're going, and where we ended up last week was all the priests in Nob had been killed. David had ended up in Moab. He dropped his parents off there and asked the king over there to take care of his parents for a while. And then David went to the wilderness in Judah. So he's somewhere around here. Today, you'll hear the word En-gedi. We'll talk about some Ziphites. And we're going to be starting our lesson with, how do you say this? Keilah. And so that gives you some idea of the geography we're talking about. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I did it. Okay, chapter 23.
You want to go?
Yeah.
Okay. So, 1 Samuel chapter 23. Now it was reported to David, look, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and looting the threshing floors. And I'm going to, pause after one verse. We heard about something similar happening with Gideon when we did a past study. These Philistines are raiders. They love to come in and take. And they don't come in and raid while the planting is going on or while the reaping is going on. That would be too much work. They wait until the crop has been planted and grown and harvested, and then they get it on the threshing floor and they begin to beat away all of the stalks and the chaff, they call it, and they get grain. And then they come in after all the work has been done and say, we're going to take the finished product. So David is out here. If you remember from last week, they've gone back to Judah and they're a little nervous about it because that's where Saul is. They've taken a lot of risk. And they get word that there's this town nearby where the Philistines have come and they're trying to steal all the grain. They're raiding the threshing floors. And so we go to verse 2 after all of that. So David inquired of the Lord, should I go and attack these Philistines? And the Lord said to David, go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. But David's men said to him, look, we're afraid here in Judah. How much more if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? Once again, David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered him, go at once to Keilah, for I will deliver the Philistines into your hand. Now, again, I'm going to interrupt it because David hears word, and even though he's on the run, he's concerned about the people. He's concerned about Israel, and he inquires of God. He says, should I go do something about this? It's not always, there's so many things in the world. In fact, not all of them are our job. And it's a great thing David remembers to ask, should I go, instead of just saying, oh, this is wrong, I'm going to go right this wrong. He asks God, God says, yeah, go do it. And he tells his men, And his men go, look, we're already exposed here. You want us to come out in the open. You want us to march into a city. You want us to fight Philistines. And then we've given up our location. We're not so sure. And David, to his credit, listens to his men and he goes back to God and he says, did I hear that right? You know, I need to be sure. In fact, Mary said this morning.
Well, it was funny because to me, this is one of the biggest challenges of my walk. And that is, you ask God, am I doing the right thing? And then you think you know what you're doing, then you could ask again. But I thought to myself, I wish it was this easy. I wish I felt the confidence that I asked God. God said yes. Someone said, Scott says, are you sure that's what we're supposed to be doing? I ask again and God says yes. But I think this is a big struggle with the walk.
Often the answer doesn't come till you put that first step in the Jordan.
There
Mickey said often the answer doesn't come till you take that first step in the Jordan. And that's right. If anything, you should see in this that David
Yeah.
gets his answer and then he thinks about it and says, I want to be sure that I'm not, this isn't me. I want to be sure. Did you really say to do this? So he gets a response. He's certain of it. And the next verse we read, then David and his men went to Keilah. So they listened to David. They believed it. They went. They fought against the Philistines and carried off their livestock, striking them with a mighty blow. So David saved the people of Keilah. Now, Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, had brought the ephod with him when he fled to David at Keilah. That happened last week. But this ephod, I'm just only going to talk about it briefly. That verse is in here for a reason, to say that apparently David went to who was now the only priest around. I guess that makes him the high priest. But it appears that he consulted with Ahimelech, the priest. And it says this ephod, this symbol of the priesthood, it's letting us know that David sought that through the priest. So they rescue the town. Saul gets word of it. That also, we keep seeing examples that word travels. I don't know, people are bored. There are all kinds of allies and spies and people in the countryside, but word gets to Saul that David had gone to Keilah. And Saul said, God has delivered him into my hand, for he has trapped himself by entering a town with gates and bars. Meaning he's been hard to catch out in the wilderness, but now he's got himself stuck inside of a town. And Saul tells himself, God has delivered him into my hand. We have another verse where it says that David's been, staying ahead of Saul, and God does not deliver David into. So somebody's wrong here. It's Saul. But that's the way Saul, and I hate to keep interrupting, but we do that a lot. A lot of the time something will happen and it looks convenient. We go, well, look what God did for me. That's not always the case. And here's Saul doing it. So Saul hears about it and he summoned all his troops to go to war at Keilah and besiege David and his men. There's so much sometimes in these verses. He summoned all of his men. Later, we're going to see him summon a much smaller group, but this time they're going to besiege a city, and that takes a lot of people. You have to encircle it so they can't escape. It's expensive to put all those men in the field and keep feeding them. This is a big operation, and he summons all of his men to go besiege them, but David learned that Saul was plotting evil against him. Once again, word gets around. David hears about this, and it takes time to summon all the troops. And he said to Abiathar, the priest, bring the ephod. Now, I don't know what's really going on with this ephod. I don't know if it's, they're indicating that that's some way of divining God's will, or if it's simply as a priest when he's acting as that kind of advisor and prophesying God's words. If that's how they put this on as a symbol of the office, I don't know. There are a lot of theories out there and everybody's certain of them. I'm less certain. But what I do know is David goes to the priest and he consults God about what to do. And that's one more clue about who David is. And so he says, bring the ephod. And David said, O Lord, God of Israel, your servant has heard that Saul intends to come to Keilah and destroy the city on my account. And that, once again, you look at what Saul is willing to do. He's willing to punish an entire city to get to David. He is obsessed with him. And David says, will the citizens of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord God of Israel, please tell your servant. He will, said the Lord. So David asked, will the citizens of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul? They will, said the Lord. And you think about what a sad statement that is. He's come in and rescued them. And yet and it's kind of logical, Saul is going to bring all these men, they're going to encircle the town. And the choice is you get starved out or you get invaded or you turn David over. And the answer he's gotten from God is, yep, they will turn you over. So David and his men, about 600 strong, set out and departed from Keilah, moving from place to place. When Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he declined to go forth. Once again, Saul's not taking care of any business other than he's looking for David. And when he hears David's gone, I don't have him trapped, he doesn't bother to go chase him. David has evaded him now so many times. He's got egg on his face. He's not going to go, well, he was just there, I'm going to go run him down. Saul declines to go forth. And it says, David stayed in the wilderness strongholds and in the hill country of the wilderness of Ziph. Day after day, Saul searched for him, but God would not deliver David into his hand. There's the verse I was talking about. While David was in Horesh in the wilderness of Ziph, he saw that Saul had come out to take his life. And Saul's son Jonathan came to David in Horesh and strengthened his hand in God, saying, and this pay attention to, this is Jonathan saying, do not be afraid, for my father Saul will never lay a hand on you, and you will be king over Israel, and I will be your second in command. Even my father Saul knows this is true. I've been telling you for weeks that you can not even read between the lines. You can see evidence of this. Saul knows ultimately David is a better king and David's anointed. He knows that David's the guy, and he's doing all this because he doesn't like the sound of it. Saul knows the general area, and this time he has come out. He must think he's got him. And Jonathan comes secretly. Somehow Jonathan's gotten word of where Saul is, and where David is. He doesn't rat David out to his father. He comes to him secretly. If Saul had known about that, I assure you he would have killed them both. Jonathan comes to David silently, quietly, and it says it strengthens him. It strengthens his hand in God. He helps strengthen David's belief, David's faith in God. That's a great thing for someone to do for you. And Jonathan says, finally, openly, I've been saying for weeks, but Jonathan says, don't be afraid, for my father Saul will never lay a hand on you, and you will become king over Israel. Now think about that, because when Saul's finally gone, when Saul's dead or when he retires, Jonathan's the king. By rights, Jonathan's going to be the king. And this is Jonathan saying, Saul's not going to lay a hand on you, and you're going to be king, and I'll be your second in command. Jonathan has every right to say, look, when Saul's gone, you won't have to be on the run anymore, because when I take over, you can come out of hiding and you can be my top guy. You can be my right-hand man. This is what I've been saying. Jonathan knows. And Jonathan says, look, I'll be your second in command. It'll be great. And the two of us will do great things. Jonathan already has a promise from David, if you remember, that when David takes over, he didn't put it in exactly those terms, but he asked him, swear to me Swear an oath to me that you won't kill my family, that you'll treat me and my family with hesed, with mercy. Was always an understanding in that, because hesed flows from up above down, that David is going to be in a position to show Jonathan mercy at some point. Well, here it is spelled out that he's got the promise. David has said, I won't do that. I will treat you with mercy. And Jonathan believes him. And so that's how he says, I can be your second in command. Typically, if something like this happened, the new king would have all of the old king's family killed. Jonathan knows David. Jonathan believes in the covenant they've made, and he feels safe saying, I'll be your second in command. There's a lot in these words. I guess I'll just keep talking. The two of them made a covenant before the Lord. We don't know what the new one is, but it says that David remained in Horesh while Jonathan went home. Then the Ziphites, remember they're in this area of Ziph. The Ziphites came up to Saul in Gibeah and said, is not David hiding among us in the strongholds at Horesh, up on the hill of Hachilah, south of Jeshimon? Okay. But David's hanging out in our neighborhood. They come and they're seeking favor with Saul. And they say, look, David's in our neighborhood. We know where he's at. He says, now, King, come down whenever your soul desires, and we'll be responsible for delivering him into your hand. And it says, Saul says, may you be blessed by the Lord, for you have had compassion on me. Compassion. I'm going to tell you where David is so you can kill him, and Saul sees that as compassion. David torments him. You've had compassion on me. Please go and prepare further. Investigate and watch carefully where he goes and who has seen him there. For I am told that he's extremely cunning. I'm told he's gotten away from you more times than you can count, but I'm told that he's cunning. He's a sneaky guy. So I want you to really, be sure that you know all of his hiding holes. And when I come, he says, observe and find out all the places where he hides. Then come back to me with certainty, and I will go with you. If he's in the land, I will search him out among all the clans of Judah. And so you see, Saul wants certainty. He says, get him really pinned down for me. But he says, if he's anywhere around, I'll find him. And I mean, Saul he's all over the place. That's part of his problem. So they set out and went to Ziph ahead of Saul. Now, David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon in the Arabah, south of Jeshimon, and more stuff. But Saul and his men went to seek him. And when David was told about it, he went down to the rock and stayed in the wilderness of Maon. And when Saul heard of this, he pursued David there. Saul was proceeding along one side of the mountain, and David and his men along the other side. Even though David was hurrying to get away, Saul and his men were closing in on David and his men to capture them. David's in trouble. I mean, Saul's riding him down. And it says then, just about that time, a messenger came to Saul saying, come quickly, for the Philistines have raided the land. And Saul broke off his pursuit of David and went to meet the Philistines. That is why this place is called Selah Hamalakoth.
Easy for you to say.
And it basically means a narrow escape. And David went up from there and lived in the strongholds of En-Gedi. So Saul is ignoring the rest of the land. Saul is focused on David. And I told you there are always spies, there are always allies. The notion that these people live together. The idea that the Philistines and the Israelites are totally separate is not true. And somebody notices that Saul has taken his army and ridden off down here and gotten words back to the Philistines. And they go, hey, that would make a pretty good time to go raid some stuff while Saul is busy elsewhere. And word gets to Saul, he's not taking care of business. And so here come the Philistines, and word, Saul is that close. He's that close. He's just about to get to him. And word comes, hey, the Philistines are, and Saul's got to break off. He has no choice. Saul takes off and goes after him. And David and his men went up and lived in the strongholds of En-Gedi. We went to En-Gedi. I have pictures of En-Gedi. They're very cool. They're not on my thumb drive.
They're on his desktop
They're
at
on
the house.
desktop of my house computer at the house. So you don't get to see our cool pictures of En-Gedi. But there's a place, the Dead Sea is just what it sounds like. And there's a little plain, and then there are these mountains, these big, pretty steep hills. And there's a place up there where there's this spring, there's a waterfall. There are animals living up there. There are wild goats. I don't know why anybody would ever live anywhere else. It's beautiful. It's just like, it's a magical place. And I guess there's just not enough food. They got to come down sometime. Maybe they miss their family. I don't know, because I always said, I look around at this mess that, it looks like God's judgment. And here's this place. I just go up there and stay. I'd move my family in, and that would be, it wouldn't be called En-Gedi. It would be called Scott's Place. So I'll show you pictures maybe next week, but they go in and hide in this wonderful hiding place at En-Gedi. And the next thing we read, do you want to start reading?
Yeah, and you can stop me when you want to. After Saul had returned from, my glasses on, from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all of Israel and went to look for David and his men in the regions of the rocks of the wild goats. 3,000 men. Soon Saul came to the sheepfolds along the road where there was a cave, and he went to relieve himself. And David and his men were hiding in the recesses of the cave. So David's men said to him, this is the day about which the Lord said to you, behold, I will deliver your enemy into your hand, that you may do with him as you wish. Then David crept up secretly and cut off a corner of Saul's robe.
Okay. So we have an indication that David has been told, at some point, I'm going to deliver Saul into your hands, and you can do with him as you wish. And I also have a neat picture of some of these caves, which is on my desktop at home and not on my thumb drive, but I'll show you. And if it's puzzling, if you see the pictures, it'll make a little more sense. But they're up in a cave. It's nice and cool in there, and they're back in the back. They're hiding. And it says that, and remember that there's a flat plain a lot of the time, and then these caves are up in these rocky hills, these mountains. And it says David goes up to relieve himself. It doesn't say, maybe, what happens is that the men are huddled in the back. David and his men are there. They see that it's Saul. Saul has left the rest of his army. Maybe he's got a couple of people with him, but he's gone away on his own. And David and his men see that it's Saul, and they tell him, they whisper, obviously, this is it. This is the time that you were told about, that God said, I'm going to deliver Saul into your hands. And it says that David went up, snuck up, and cut a corner off of Saul's robe. Now, if that sounds hard to believe, how does that work? I know it says it, I believe it, but how does that work? Well, first of all, it doesn't say that Saul was wearing the robe. Oops. It's, and the idea of being able to creep up, if you see the caves, it'll make a little more sense. And you don't know, Saul leaves his robe laying there. But when we were there, you guys know Petra in Jordan, the city that's carved into the rock? Young men used to sneak across the border, and it was sort of a rite of passage. A lot of them would sneak their way all the way in, knowing the people, and they get to Jordan, get a picture of themselves in Petra, and then go back home. And some of them got caught and got killed. And so I know the people, that there are certain things, it doesn't really surprise me, but David sneaks up and he cuts a corner off the robe.
Afterwards, David's conscience was stricken because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. So he said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord anointed. May I never lift my hand against him, since he is the Lord's anointed." With these words, David restrained his men, and he did not let them rise up against Saul. Then Saul left the cave and went on his way.
Again, lots of stuff contained in some of these words. He comes back and he begins to have pangs of conscience. He begins to think about what he's done. And even though Saul's trying to kill him, he feels bad. He's been disrespectful. And I've been telling you again for weeks, I cheated, I'd read ahead. But you could see signs that David is not going to raise his hand against God's anointed king. It's a big deal. And you put yourself in the situation of his men. Saul's trying to kill them too. And they got to run around and hide and everything else. And they've got a chance. It's one thing for David to understand, but that this is God's anointed. But he tells his men, you know, I shouldn't have disrespected him. I'm not going to lay a hand on him. And you think his men might be saying, that's good for you, David. But honestly, I'm tired of living in caves. And they could have gotten together. And it shows the respect that they had for David as a leader, that they agreed not to do it. Real quickly, though, the big point here is, when you look at what David is saying about not putting a hand on God's anointed, it's a big deal. We'll hear more about it.
With these words, David restrained his men, and he did not let them rise up against Saul. Then Saul left the cave and went on his way. After that, David got up, went out of the cave, and called to Saul, "My lord the king." When Saul looked behind him, David bowed face down in reverence and said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, 'Look, David intends to harm you'? Behold, this day you have seen with your own eyes that the Lord delivered you into my hand in the cave. I was told to kill you, but I spared you, and I said, I will not lift my hand against the Lord, since he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at the corner of your robe in my hand, for I cut it off, but I did not kill you. See and know that there is no evil or rebellion in my hands. I have not sinned against you, even though you're hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord take vengeance on you. But my hand will never be against you. As the old proverb says, wickedness proceeds from the wicked, but my hand will never be against you. Against whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom are you pursuing? A dead dog, a flea? May the Lord be your judge and decide between you and me. May he notice and plead my case and deliver me from your hands.
Okay, all right. So Saul begins to walk away. And as I've said before, he didn't bring all 3,000 men up the hillside to the cave. Maybe he's got some people with him, a couple, maybe he doesn't even have that, but probably. The point is, he's walking away and he gets a reasonable distance. And David comes out of the cave and calls out to him. And he calls out to him with respect. He says, "My lord the king." And Saul looked back and David bowed face down in reverence. The guy who's trying to kill him. And David is showing nothing but loyalty to Saul.
So then when David had finished saying these things, Saul called back, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" Then.
Go ahead.
Then
you read it. I'm.
Oh no, I haven't read this part yet.
Okay.
Then Saul wept out loud and said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have rewarded me with good, though I have rewarded you with evil. And you have shown this day how well you have dealt with me. For when the Lord delivered me into your hand, you did not kill me. When a man finds his enemy, does he let him go away unharmed? May the Lord reward you with good for what you have done for me this day. I know for sure that you will be king and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. So now swear to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's house. David gave his oath to Saul. Then Saul returned home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold.
So I think the message I just got is that we're saving time for the last chapter. So I'm going to do this quick. There are a couple of things in there. David has this conversation with Saul. Saul realizes, David had a chance to kill him and didn't. David's not his enemy. And that's the message David is getting. Look, I could have killed you back there easily, and I didn't do it. I'm not your enemy. He begins to get a little bit of a rant though. And he says, may God judge between you and me. I've done nothing but good to you. You've repaid me with evil. And at one point he says, who am I? What is it that you're pursuing? A dead dog, a flea? Remember when Goliath comes out to meet David, they send out this shepherd boy with a staff and a sling. And Goliath is angry and he says, what am I, a dog that you send somebody out with a stick? Send me a real man. And David is making it clear he's a little bit insulted. I'm not a dog for you to pursue. I'm somebody. So he can't resist getting a little bit of a jab in. But Saul realizes it. Saul begins to weep. You've repaid evil with good. May God bless you. But then he says the important thing down here at the end. He says, now I know for sure that you will be king. He's suspected it for a long time. I've been telling you that. You could see it in the way things unfold. And he says, I guess I kind of knew it. Now I know for sure.
Because you got to remember, Samuel told him a long time ago that you haven't done well and you're going to lose being king.
Your
But
kingdom won't survive.
But he didn't say who was going to take it over.
That's right. But he's known, deep down, he's known. Now I know for sure that you will be king and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. The kingdom, which is this lineage, will be established in your hands. So now swear to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's house. This is the thing I've been telling you. When a new king takes over like that, he tends to kill off all the descendants so that nobody comes back and threatens his line. And Saul is asking David for something that David doesn't have to agree to. He says, promise me you won't wipe out my line. And you see once again how important that is. David has already given that assurance to Jonathan. Jonathan has said, remember, promise me that you'll treat me and my house, my descendants, with hesed, with mercy. Saul, though, doesn't know about it. And Saul says, I know you're going to be king. I know it's going to happen. Just promise me you won't kill off my whole line. And David agrees. And then you notice Saul goes home. Now, I wondered, Mary and I talked this morning, if Saul did have all 3,000 of his men there, would he have been as eager to think the way that he did? Or would he have said, oh, now the tables are turned, I got you. But Saul goes home. And you notice David doesn't go back to Gibeah with him. David has heard the words that Saul has said. You're more righteous than me. You're going to be the king. Kingdom's going to be established through you. Just promise me you won't. But David does not take that as a sign that we can all just get along and he can come back home. David, and he's wise to do that, as we'll see later.
So we're on chapter 25, and chapter 25 is a great story. There's the first verse that's sort of a separate part. I'm going to read that first. When Samuel died, all Israel gathered to mourn for him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David set out and went down to the wilderness of Paran. So this is the end of Samuel's life. Remember, we studied Samuel. He was the last judge. He was a prophet. He had lived a long life, and now his time is over. He has died. The rest of chapter 25 is the story of David, Nabal, and Abigail. And I am going to read this story all the way through, and then you can interrupt, okay? Do you want me to read it, or do you want to read it?
All the way through. Let's go.
Just a second. Okay. Now there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. He was a very wealthy man with 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband, a Calebite, was harsh and evil in his dealings. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So David sent 10 young men and instructed them, "Go to Nabal at Carmel, greet him in my name, and say to him, 'Long life to you, and peace to you in your house, and to all that belong to you. Now I hear that it is time for shearing. When your shepherds were with us, we did not harass them, and nothing of theirs was missing the whole time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. So let my young men find favor with you, for we have come on the day of a feast. Please give whatever you can afford to your servants and to your son David.' When David's young men arrived, they relayed all these words to Nabal on behalf of David. Then they waited. But Nabal asked them, 'Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? Many servants these days are breaking away from their masters. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give them to these men whose origin I do not know?' So David's men turned around and went back, and they relayed to him all these words. And David said to his men, 'Strap on your swords.' So David and all his men put on their swords. About 400 men followed David, while 200 stayed with the supplies." Do you want to, you can add something now.
I can?
Yeah.
All right, so make it real quick. There's this guy named Nabal. It says he's living up here. His business is in Carmel, Mount Carmel. So he's living in a place that he likes better, but he's running a bunch of sheep down in a different place. He's rich, and it says that he's just an obstinate man. He's not a nice guy, but he's got this wife who's beautiful and intelligent. And it says that Nabal was harsh and evil in his dealings. David's out in the wilderness, and he hears that Nabal is shearing. I heard someone say, and it's absolutely right, that shearing is to a rancher the same thing that harvest time is to a farmer. And it's a feast time. It's a celebration. And David knows that. David has been living, him and his men have been living out in the wilderness with these shepherds, with Nabal's people. And it says that he sends these 10 young men to go to Nabal in his stead. It says they come in the name of David. We don't have time to get to all of that. Let me just say they come in the name of David, and Nabal says, "Who's David? What's that to me?" Says, there are a lot of men breaking away from their masters right now, a lot of servants breaking away from their masters. And he's saying that's what David is. He's broken away from his master, and he's like an outlaw. There's a lot of these lowlives out there. And then he says, why should I give any of my bread and meat to these runaway, servants? Why should I give it to people whose origin I don't know? Now, if you don't know his origin, then how do you know he's broken away from his master? One thing you should know, we'll get to some other things about this, but the generosity that David has asked for is expected with the Jews, with the Israelites. It's expected. You don't leave someone in need. They aren't allowed to lend money at interest. If you have money and your neighbor is in need of something, you loan it to them. You don't charge them interest. You don't break them. When we lived in San Antonio, our kids went to a private school. There was a boy there named
Marcus.
Marcos. And when it was time they were going to graduate, Marcus says he's going to go to college. And in the conversation, it comes out that one of the people from their synagogue is going to pay for Marcus's college. Just pay for it. Marcus's dad was a law professor. Now, I think he did a lot of social justice pro bono stuff. I don't think they had a lot of money. And since they couldn't afford it, someone from the congregation is just going to pay for Marcus's college. And that's alien to us. But it's expected. Nabal should have just said, yes, you're living out there here. Let me feed you. But then what we learn and what we get here, and we'll get more of it, is that David's been living among them. And it says, the young men say, the whole time we were there, nothing went missing. And it sounds to a lot of people like they're saying, we lived with around your shepherds. We didn't steal from them. That's not what it's saying. It's saying that the raiders who come didn't get off with anything because we protected them. We've been doing you a service, and your harvest, your shearing, is going to be much more lucrative because we kept your stuff safe.
And Nabal knew who David was.
Of course, Nabal knew who David was. He knew who David was, and he pretends like, who's this David character? He knows who David is. And he's just saying, I'm keeping my stuff. I don't know, you have no right to come to me and demand that I give up some of my hard-earned goods. Okay?
Okay. Meanwhile, one of Nabal's young men informed Nabal's wife.
When David's men, start at 9.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. When David young men arrived, they relayed all these words to Nabal on behalf of David. Then they waited. But Nabal asked them, oh no, I already read that. Yeah. So I went back, relayed these words.
12.
So David's men turned around and went back, and they relayed to him all these words. And David said to his men, strap on your swords. So David and all his men put on their swords, and about 400 men followed David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. Do you want to?
Real quickly, David's hot. And they've gone back and told David everything that Nabal said about him, that he's just like a runaway slave. And David's hot. And he says, boys, strap on your swords. We're gonna ride down upon them. This is ego talking.
And one of the things this has been 8-10 years of him running, and his reaction to Saul has always been good. This is a change for David. David's not
Well, it's not
doing
Saul
well.
though. It's
No,
it's
I
Nabal,
know,
yeah.
but his reaction to Nabal is not how his reaction has been to Saul, and he's losing it.
That's true.
Okay. Meanwhile, one of Nabal's young men informed Nabal's wife, Abigail, look, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he scolded them. Yet these men were very good to us. When we were in the field, we were not harassed, and nothing of ours went missing the whole time we lived among them. They were a wall around us, both day and night, the whole time we were herding our sheep near them. Now consider carefully what you must do, because disaster looms over our master and all his household, for he is such a scoundrel that nobody can speak to him. Then Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 butchered sheep, 5 sheaths of roasted grain, and 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs. She loaded them on donkeys and said to her young men, go ahead of me, I will be right behind you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. Abigail came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine. She saw David and his men coming down towards her, and she met them. Now David had just finished saying, in vain I have protected all that belonged to this man in the wilderness. Nothing that belongs to him has gone missing, yet he has paid me back evil for good. May God punish David, and ever so severely, I will let if I let one of Nabal's men survive until morning. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off the donkey, fell face down, and bowed before him. She fell at his feet and said, and I'll stop there before I do her speech.
We'll try and make it real quick. So David is, he's not taking the insult. And he said, I'm riding down and we're going to kill them all. We're going to go in, we're going to kill Nabal, we're going to kill every male of the household. We're going to get revenge for this insult and this failure to share with us like he's supposed to. And one of the servants finds out about this and goes to Abigail and says, you got to do something. He said, look, and it's not respectful, but everybody obviously knows what and who Nabal is. And he says, the guy's a fool. And we know that nobody can talk. I can't talk to him. If I try and talk to him, he says, you got to do something, because he's insulted this man and it's going to go bad for all of us. And Abigail wisely puts together all of this food, has it all loaded on wagons and donkeys and whatever, and she sends the servants ahead of her. If you remember a time when Jacob and Esau, Jacob has cheated Esau out of his inheritance, and then Jacob's coming home and he puts all these gifts, all this livestock, and he sends them out in front of him because he's trying to soften Esau up. And he says, after he gets all these gifts, he's going to be less inclined to kill me. It's pretty wise. And Abigail's wise. And Abigail sends all this stuff out in front, and she comes along behind after David has received this line of, donkeys and food and everything. And David's probably got to be wondering, I don't know what's going on. Nabal said he wasn't going to give me any of this, and now here it is. Abigail shows up at the end, climbs down off the donkey, goes down, lay on her face, and says, let the blame. No,
I haven't read yet.
Go ahead.
One point to make too is that this servant went to Abigail and said something. I mean, this is not, a servant and Abigail were probably pretty much at the same level. But for the servant to think that Abigail could do something says a lot about
We're
Abigail.
going to talk about that.
Yeah. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off the donkey, fell face down, and bowed before him. She fell at her feet and said, my Lord, may the blame on me, may the blame be on me alone, but please let your servant speak to you. Hear the words of your servant. My Lord should pay no attention to this scoundrel Nabal, for he lives up to his name. His name means fool, and folly accompanies him. I, your servant, did not see my Lord's young men whom you sent. Now, my Lord, as surely as the Lord lives, and you yourself live, the Lord has held you back from coming to bloodshed and avenging yourself with your own hand. May your enemies and those who seek harm for my Lord be like Nabal. Now let this gift your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow you. Please forgive my servant's offense, for the Lord will surely make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because he fights the Lord's battles.
All right, let's stop there real quick, because there's a couple of important things here. Abigail gets down, fell face down, and she said, may the blame be on me alone. She knows David's riding in to kill all these people, and she turns the tables. May the blame be on me. There's no blame on her. There really isn't. But she knows she knows who David is. There are probably some men that would say, okay, and kill her too. But she knows who David is. May the blame be on me alone. And she said, let me go back to it. But she says, please, may the blame be on me, but please just listen to what I'm going to say. Listen to your servant. And she's made it plain. She's his servant. She says, my Lord should pay no attention to the scoundrel Nabal. He lives up to his name. He's a fool. Don't pay any attention to Nabal. She says, your servant, didn't see my Lord's young men when they came. She says, if I'd have been there when your men came asking for food, I would have made sure they got it. Okay? I wasn't there. I'm sorry. And she apologizes. She says, take this gift. Let it be shared among all your men. And she said, please forgive your servant, that's her, please forgive your servant's offense. For the Lord will surely make you a lasting dynasty. She's buttering him up. God's gonna reward you for stopping what you're doing. And at one point she says, surely the Lord has prevented you from doing this thing. So she's reminding him, God doesn't want you. This is wrong, what you're doing. This will displease God.
No, but let's go. We're going to slow down.
We're close.
But people will question why Nabal's name means fool.
I don't know. I was going to do a deep dive on that. This thing with the names, Hebrew's kind of funny. There are times, well, a lot of times, and I won't get into all the reasons why it has to do with the number of characters and the way, but words sometimes have more than one meaning. And you tell by context. And so it may be that he was named Nabal for a different reason, but it also means fool. And they're saying, look, let's face it, that's what his name really should mean because he's a fool. I don't know. Maybe someday I'll have time to do that dive.
Where did I leave off? You should pursue and seek your life. When the Lord is in, as long as you live, should someone pursue you and seek your life, then the life of my Lord, you can read on.
The life of my Lord will be bound securely by the Lord, your God, in the bundle of the living. But he shall fling away the lives of your enemies like stones from a sling. She's laying it on thick.
Stones from a sling?
Yeah, stones from a sling. She knows the story about Goliath, and she's tailored this. This is a really well-crafted speech. I mean, she's smart. She's wise. And she goes, look, she's already presumed, you see, she's already said, the Lord has restrained you from doing this terrible thing. Well, he hasn't been restrained. He hadn't made up his mind yet, but she presents it in a way that it's already understood. And she said, because of that, when someone seeks your life, God will protect you and fling their lives away like the stones from a sling. She's tailored the message just for David.
When the Lord has done for my Lord all the good he promised, and when he has appointed you ruler over Israel, then my Lord will have no remorse or guilt of conscience over needless bloodshed and revenge. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, may you remember your maidservant.
And real quick, when you become king, you won't have this guilt, this blood guilt on your conscience. She thinks he's going to become king too. This is, a lot of people have sort of taken notice of this difference between David and Saul. So it's not exactly a secret. And you don't want to take over as king and have it out there that you rode in and killed all of these innocent men just over an insult. You don't want that hanging over you when you become king. She's right.
Then David's going to answer Abigail, and listen to what David says. This is another reason he's a man after God's own heart. Then David said to Abigail, blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you to meet me this day. Blessed is your discernment, and blessed are you, because today you kept me from bloodshed and from avenging myself by my own hand. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has restrained me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, then surely no male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by morning light. Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought him, and he said to her, go home in peace. See that I heeded your voice and granted your request.
And again, there's a lot contained in here. The first thing, when she gives this speech and tells him, you don't want this hanging over your head, David's response is, blessed be the Lord God of Israel, who sent you to meet me this day. Sometimes people say, thank God for sending you to me. And I know people who bristle at that. God didn't do that. I thought that up. How about a little credit for yours truly? David says, thank God for sending you to me this day. Blessed is your discernment, and blessed are you, because today you kept me from bloodshed. And here, for me, this is the most important little verse of the whole lesson today. You kept me from bloodshed and from avenging myself at my own hand. David says, that's what I was about to do. I was about to go take vengeance on my own. A lot of you know the verse, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Nabal did something wrong. He did. And he had probably some justice coming, but it wasn't David's to mete out. And that's where he went wrong on this. And he says, you being here prevented me from taking justice at my own hand. There's a lot more going on here because this is a woman. David has taken instruction from a woman. And we talk about how, those times especially, women were, second-class citizens. David is not too righteous or too big or important to take instruction from a woman. In fact, he welcomed it. And there he is. This is the only time that I'm going to go into this, because there's that verse in the New Testament that says, women, submit yourself to your husbands. And we say there's no, new laws there. I mean, it's all one God, one consistent thing. How do you reconcile those two? Look at what she's done. Her husband has said, I'm not giving David anything. It's my stuff. I'm not giving him anything. And she goes and packs up stuff and takes it to him. And what gets left out in that New Testament verse is that the men have a big responsibility too. And it breaks down, and it breaks down quickly when they aren't doing their part. I'm not going to try and get into all of that. I'm just saying Nabal is a fool. And she's actually taking care of family business because he's not. And if it's disrespectful, if she's not submissive, tough. It says God sent her. So you can take that to heart. There's an obligation on both sides. And this is a big thing that's going on right here. For David to take this instruction, she's not done anything wrong. She's done exactly what she's supposed to do. And she's actually taking care of Nabal's business, because if she doesn't do it, they're dead.
So we're going to leave at this cliffhanger because it's 10:01.
Oh, it's 10:01. And so we can't tell you any more about this.
You can read the last part of it, and we'll start at next time.
Can we finish it? Okay, we'll finish it next time. God, we are thankful. You leave for us these words. Through the lives of these people, we see ourselves. We see situations that very much the same as we get into. And we have not just preaching, but we have examples. We have good and bad examples that we're supposed to learn from. Open our eyes, open our ears, and open our hearts as we do these things. When we see ourselves in these same situations, let those words come back through to us. I'm asking that you put your hand on us and remind us. We need those reminders. We're thankful for the gifts. We're thankful for the people. Please be with those we've prayed for. We want them to come back to us safely. We want to know that your hand is upon them. In Jesus' name, amen.
Okay, I